The little Colorado River did not care about the prayers of men, and it certainly had no patience for the debts of their daughters. In the Arizona Territory, in the year of our Lord 1882, the water ran thick and red like an open artery of the earth, carrying the silt of the painted desert down toward the great canyons. It was a beast that slept shallow in the dry months and woke with a roar when the mountain storms broke up north. Eliza Hart stood on the wooden planks of the ferry landing, the toes of her leather boots nearly touching the churning water. She was 18 years old, built slim but sturdy like the willow saplings that refused to die along the bank. The wind whipped a stray lock of hair across her face, stinging her cheek, but she did not flinch. She was watching the current. It was faster today, darker. "She is rising! Papa!" Eliza called out, turning her head toward the small shack that served as the toll house. Silas Hart stepped out, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag. He was a man worn thin by worry. His shoulders curved as if he carried the weight of the cables that spanned the river. "Rising," he echoed, his voice hollow. "Just a spring surge, Eliza. It will pass. It has to pass." Eliza looked at him, her eyes the color of river stones, gray and clear. She knew he was not talking about the water. He was talking about the ledger book hidden under his mattress, the one where the numbers were written in red ink that looked too much like blood. "The cables are singing tight," she said, her tone practical. She did not like to dwell on things she could not fix with her hands. "If the drift logs come down tonight, we need to pull the boat higher up the bank. I do not want to lose another hull to a dead tree." "You work too hard for a girl," Silas muttered, though there was no malice in it, only a tired sort of shame. "You should be in town, wearing a clean dress." "Not smelling of river mud and tar," Eliza smiled faintly. "Clean dresses do not pull ropes, Papa, and town is just another place to get dirty. Only the dirt there costs more." She turned back to the river. The ferry was their life. A flat-bottomed raft guided by a thick wire cable stretched across the expanse. It was the only way across the water for 20 miles in either direction. Traders, soldiers, and drifters all had to pay the toll or risk their horses in the unpredictable currents. But lately, the coins dropping into Silas's tin box were fewer, and the shadow falling over their home was growing longer. That shadow had a name, Caleb Rusk. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and walked up the path toward the small cabin they called home. Inside, on a rough-hewn table, sat a few dried bundles of sage and chaparral, along with a worn Bible and a slate board. This was her rebellion. Every Tuesday, she walked 3 miles to the edge of the settlement to visit Señora Elena, a Mexican widow who lived in an adobe hut surrounded by a garden of prickly pear and aloe. The townspeople called Elena a witch when they were healthy, and a savior when their children burned with fever. From her, Eliza learned that willow bark could ease a headache and that honey could keep a wound from festering. And on Sundays, after the old Parson Miller finished his sermon in the drafty chapel, Eliza would stay behind, not to pray for a husband, as the other girls did, but to trade chores for books. She scrubbed the chapel floors, and in return, the parson taught her the shapes of letters. She wanted to teach the children who ran wild along the riverbanks, the ones whose parents signed their names with an X. "Knowledge is light," Parson Miller had told her once, his voice wheezing like a broken accordion. "But light reveals the dust in the corners. Child, be careful what you see." Eliza sat at the table and opened a small jar of salve she had mixed the day before. It smelled of pine pitch and beeswax. She was proud of it, but her pride was interrupted by the sound of hooves thudding heavily on the packed earth outside. She froze. It was not the rhythmic trot of a traveler looking for passage. It was the heavy, arrogant pace of men who owned the ground they rode on. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out onto the porch. 2 riders had stopped by the toll house. One was a hired gun, a man with a face like tanned leather and eyes that watched nothing and everything at once. The other was Caleb Rusk. Rusk was a handsome man in the way a wolf is handsome. He wore a suit of fine gray wool, dusted but not dirty, and a hat that cost more than Eliza's father made in 6 months. He ran the trading post at the crossroads, the spider at the center of a web that caught everything from cattle to government contracts. "Good afternoon, Miss Hart," Rusk said, tipping his hat. His voice was smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. "Mr. Rusk," Eliza replied, keeping her chin level. She did not step down from the porch. "My father is down by the water." "I saw him," Rusk said. He dismounted with an easy grace and walked toward her. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, looking up. It forced her to look down at him, but somehow he still made her feel small. "But I find business is often more pleasant when discussed with a charming intermediary." "We have the payment for the flour," Eliza said quickly. "Papa put it aside yesterday." Rusk chuckled, a low sound in his throat. "The flour, Eliza. My dear, the flour is a trifle. A drop in the bucket. I am speaking of the note your father signed last winter, the one for the new cables and the timber repairs." Eliza felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "He is working on it. The river is high. Traffic will pick up when the soldiers come through for the summer patrol." "The soldiers," Rusk mused, glancing around the modest homestead. "I heard a rumor about the soldiers. They are chasing ghosts. You know, they say a Navajo warrior attacked a supply wagon up near the canyon, killed 2 men, stole crates of, well, things that do not belong to savages." Eliza stiffened. The Navajo moved through this land like the wind. They crossed on the ferry sometimes, paying with silver buttons or tanned hides. They were quiet, proud people. She had never known them to attack without cause. "I do not listen to rumors," Eliza said. "You should," Rusk said softly. His eyes traveled over her, lingering on the curve of her neck, the worn fabric of her dress. It was not a look of lust. Exactly. It was the look a man gives a horse at an auction, checking its teeth and flanks. "Rumors are the way the world whispers its secrets. And the secret is, Eliza, your father is out of time." He took a step up. $500. That is the sum. And with the interest, it grows every day the sun rises. $500. He might as well have said $1 million. It was an impossible amount. "We do not have it," Eliza said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "I know," Rusk said. He reached out and, with a shocking familiarity, tucked the stray lock of hair behind her ear. Eliza flinched back, but he did not pull away. "But I am a reasonable man. I need a wife. Eliza, a man of my standing needs a woman to run his house, to civilize his life. Your father, he could be comfortable. The debt could be forgiven, considered a dowry, of sorts." Eliza stared at him. The air seemed to leave the porch. He was buying her. He was trading a stack of paper debts for her life, her body, her future. "I am not for sale. Mr. Rusk," she whispered. Rusk's smile did not waver, but his eyes went hard. "Everything is for sale in this territory, my dear. Even innocence. Think on it. I will be back in 3 days. If not, well, the law is the law, and the law says a debtor loses his property. All of it." He tipped his hat again, turned on his heel, and mounted his horse. As he rode away, the dust settled on the porch railing, gray and choking. Eliza stood there for a long time. She looked at her hands. They were rough, stained with labor. They were hands that wanted to heal, to mend, to hold a book. They were not hands meant to pour tea for a man like Caleb Rusk in a house built on extortion. Down by the river, her father was sitting on a stump, his head in his hands. He looked small against the backdrop of the rising water. Eliza walked down to him. She did not mention Rusk's offer. She could not bear to see the look of relief that might cross his face, or worse, the look of utter defeat. "The water is getting faster," she said instead. Silas looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. "It is the season, Eliza. Everything washes away eventually." That night, the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls. Eliza lay in her narrow bed, staring at the rough timber of the ceiling. She thought of the Navajo warrior Rusk had mentioned, A killer, they said, a savage. But Rusk was a civilized man, and he was the one who made her skin crawl. Who was the real savage the next morning? The world was gray. The river had swollen overnight, chewing at the banks. It was so angry, muddy brown, carrying debris from the high country branches, whole bushes, sometimes the carcass of a drowned calf. Eliza went about her chores with a mechanical efficiency. She fed the chickens, she chopped wood, she checked the tension on the ferry cable. The steel rope was humming, vibrating with the force of the current dragging against the heavy boat. Around noon, a boy rode up on a mule. It was Toby, the messenger who ran letters between the military outpost and the town. He was 12 years old and had more dust on him than a desert lizard. "Miss Eliza," he called out, sliding off the mule. "Miss Eliza, can I get a cup of water? The creek is pure mud." "Of course, Toby," Eliza said, dipping a ladle into the barrel by the door. The boy drank greedily, water streaming down his chin. He wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "You hear about the bounty?" he asked, his eyes wide with the thrill of bad news. "Mr. Rusk mentioned it," Eliza said, keeping her voice even. "It is big money," Toby said. $100 for the Indian, dead or alive. They say he ambushed a wagon near Devil's Chasm, but—" The boy lowered his voice, looking around as if the pine trees had ears. "My cousin works at the livery. He said the wagon came back empty, but there were no bullet holes in it, and the driver, he was not hurt, just scared." "That sounds strange," Eliza said, frowning. "It does," Toby agreed. "And I saw the soldiers riding out this morning. They are not looking for a wagon. They are looking for a man. They say he is hurt, bleeding, cannot get far." Eliza looked toward the north, where the mountains were shrouded in storm clouds. "A hurt man. A man hunted like a wolf. You be careful, Toby," she said. "Do not go asking too many questions. I am just the male." The boy grinned. "Nobody shoots the male." He hopped back on his mule. "Tell your papa the river is supposed to crest by tomorrow. Best tie that boat tight." Eliza watched him go. The feeling of unease that had settled in her chest yesterday was growing heavier. It was not just the debt. It was the air itself. It felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. She spent the afternoon reinforcing the ferry's moorings. Her father was useless today, lost in a bottle of whiskey he had hidden in the tool shed. Eliza did not scold him. Fear made men do weak things. She just took the sledgehammer and drove the stakes deeper into the mud herself. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, Eliza walked along the riverbank. She needed driftwood. The high water always brought good timber down seasoned pine from the high forests that she could use to patch the ferry deck or fix the roof. It was free lumber, the only gift the river ever gave them. She walked a mile upstream, her eyes scanning the waterline. The roar of the water was deafening here. It sounded like 1,000 horses galloping over stone. She found a large piece of cedar caught in a tangle of roots and bent to pry it loose. As she tugged, her gaze drifted out to the middle of the torrent. Something was bobbing in the water. At first, she thought it was a log, dark, heavy, rolling in the violent chop. But then it spun, and she saw a flash of something that was not wood. It was fabric, buckskin, and an arm. It was a man. He was caught in the eddy of a large boulder in the center of the river, clinging to a snag of deadwood with one hand. The water was battering him, smashing over his head, trying to tear him loose. He was limp, his grip failing. Eliza did not think. The civilized world would say she should run. It would say he was a stranger. Perhaps the killer Rusk spoke of. It would say a woman could not pull a man from a flood. But Eliza Hart was not thinking about civilization. She was thinking about the breath in her lungs and how precious it was. She grabbed the coil of rope she always carried when scavenging for wood. She tied one end around the trunk of a massive cottonwood tree that leaned over the bank. The other end, she looped around her waist, cinching it tight with a knot her father had taught her when she was 6. She kicked off her heavy boots. The mud was cold between her toes. "You are a fool, Eliza," she whispered to herself. Then she dove. The shock of the water was like a physical blow. It was freezing, melted snow from the peaks. It grabbed her, spun her, tried to drag her down. But Eliza knew this river. She knew the currents the way a woman knows the mood of a difficult husband. She did not fight the flow. She angled into it, using the force to push her toward the center. The rope pulled taut at her waist, bruising her ribs, but it held. She fought through the brown foam, gasping for air, her eyes stinging. She reached the boulder. The man was slipping. His head was underwater now. She lunged, her fingers tangling in his long, dark hair. She pulled his head up. He did not open his eyes. His face was a mask of exhaustion and pain, streaked with mud and blood. He was heavy, dead weight. "Wake up!" she screamed over the roar of the water. "You have to help me!" He did not move. Eliza hooked her arm under his armpit. She pushed off the boulder with her legs, swinging them both back into the current. The rope went slack for a second, then snapped tight as the river caught them. They swung in a wide arc toward the bank, the water trying to smash them against the rocks. Eliza kicked wildly, steering them. She swallowed a mouthful of grit. Her lungs were burning. They hit the mud of the shallows hard. Eliza clawed at the earth, dragging herself up, dragging him with her. She did not stop until they were completely out of the water, lying in the wet grass of the bank. For a long minute, there was only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the relentless thunder of the river. She rolled over, shivering violently. She crawled to the man. He was young, maybe 25. His skin was the color of copper in the twilight. He wore a shirt of buckskin that was torn and dark with water and blood, and trousers of rough wool. On his feet were moccasins that had been worn thin. Eliza put her ear to his chest. A heartbeat, faint, erratic, but there. She sat back, brushing the wet hair from her face. She looked at his wrists. There were raw, red rings around them, rope burns, deep ones. He had not just fallen in. He had been tied. Eliza's gaze moved to his belt. There was a knife sheath, empty, but tucked securely behind it was a heavy revolver. And jammed next to the gun was something else, a small oilskin packet, tied shut with rawhide. It looked like the sort of pouch a man would carry tobacco in, or perhaps something more precious. She reached out to touch his shoulder, to shake him. His eyes snapped open. They were black, bottomless, and filled with a sudden, terrifying focus. Before Eliza could blink, his hand shot out and gripped her wrist. His grip was like iron. He tried to speak, but only a rasping sound came out. He coughed, water spilling from his lips. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers with a desperate intensity. "The papers," he choked out. The words were English, but heavily accented. "Do not let them see." "Who?" Eliza asked, her voice trembling. "Who did this to you?" He did not answer. His eyes rolled back, and his hand went limp, falling from her wrist to the mud. Eliza sat there, shivering in the cold wind of the coming night. She looked at the man, this savage who had been thrown away by the river, this warrior with the bounty on his head. She looked at the oilskin pouch at his waist. Then she looked back toward the ferry, where her father sat in a drunken stupor and where Caleb Rusk would return in 3 days to claim her as payment for a debt. The river roared on. Indifferent, Eliza made her choice. She did not run to town. She did not run to her father. She stood up, grabbed the man by his shoulders, and began to drag him toward the old woodshed hidden in the grove of willows behind the house. It was heavy work. It was dangerous work. It was the kind of work that got a girl killed in the Arizona territory. But Eliza Hart was done being a victim of debts she did not incur. As she pulled him into the shadows, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, washing away their tracks in the mud, sealing their fate together in the dark. The woodshed smelled of damp sawdust, mouse droppings, and the sharp, metallic tang of river mud. Rain hammered against the warped cedar shingles of the roof, a relentless drumming that masked the harsh, ragged breathing of the man lying on the pile of burlap sacks. Eliza Hart bolted the door with a trembling hand. The adrenaline that had fueled her plunge into the freezing little Colorado was fading, replaced by a bone-deep chill. She was soaked to the skin, her dress clinging to her like a second, freezing skin, but she could not think of her own comfort. She turned to the man. In the dim light of the single kerosene lantern she had managed to light, he looked less like a warrior and more like a broken thing discarded by the storm. He was shivering violently, his teeth chattering with a sound like dry stones clicking together. Eliza knelt beside him. She needed to get him warm, and she needed to see how badly he was hurt. She reached for the knife at his belt. The sheath was empty. She remembered, but as her hand brushed his waist, she felt the hard, cold steel of the revolver he had jammed there. She pulled it out carefully, her fingers slick with mud. It was a heavy weapon, a Colt Peacemaker with a grip of worn walnut. She turned it over in the yellow light. Carved into the butt of the gun was not a tribal symbol, but a brand. Small and precise, a circle with a jagged line running through it. It looked like a broken wheel. She set the gun aside and reached for the oilskin packet tied to his belt. The rawhide knot was wet and stubborn, but her fingers were strong from working the ferry cables. She worked it loose. Inside was not tobacco or a talisman. It was a stack of papers. They were damp at the edges, but the ink was still legible. It was a ledger page, torn from a book. Eliza squinted at the handwriting. It was a list of supplies: 50 barrels of flour, 20 crates of mining tools, 10 bolts of calico. But underneath the list, scrawled in a hasty, different hand, were notes. Weight is wrong. Crates are too heavy for tools. Markings on bottom do not match manifest. Eliza frowned. This was a shipping invoice. Why would a man Rusk called a savage killer be carrying a shipping invoice? The man on the floor groaned. His head thrashed to the side, and his eyes cracked open. They were glazed with fever and shock, unable to focus. "Easy," Eliza whispered, reverting to the tone she used with the skittish horses on the ferry. "You are safe. You are out of the river." He tried to sit up, but his arms collapsed under him. He grasped at the air, his hand catching Eliza's wrist. His grip was weak now, his skin burning hot despite the river water. "The goods," he rasped, the words tearing out of his throat. "Not tools." "What?" Eliza leaned closer. "What are you saying?" "Switched," he whispered. His eyes found hers, and for a second, the fog cleared. There was terror there, and anger. "Rusk, he switched. The crates." The name hit Eliza like a slap. "Rusk. Caleb Rusk," she asked. "The traitor." The man nodded, a jerk of his chin. "Saw the papers. Saw inside." He coughed, a wet, hacking sound that brought up bloody froth. "Do not let him find me." His head lolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness again. Eliza sat back on her heels, her heart pounding against her ribs. She looked at the papers in her hand, then at the man. Rusk had said this man was a murderer who had attacked a wagon. But the man said Rusk had switched the goods. If Rusk was lying about the attack, he was lying about everything. Eliza moved quickly. She could not leave him in wet buckskins. She stripped the tunic off him, it was already ruined, and gasped when she saw his chest. It was a map of violence, old scars from a hard life, crossed by fresh, purple bruising where the river rocks had battered him. But the worst wound was on his side, a grazing bullet furrow that was angry and red. She scrambled to the corner of the shed where she kept her small stash of dried herbs, hidden from her father's skepticism. She grabbed a jar of salve she had made from comfrey and pine pitch, the recipe Senora Elena had taught her. "This will sting," she murmured to the unconscious man. She cleaned the wound with the cleanest part of her petticoat, soaked in rainwater from a bucket by the door. Then she packed the salve into the furrow. He flinched in his sleep but did not wake. She found an old horse blanket, smelling of oats and sweat, and tucked it around him. She was harboring a fugitive. In the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of the town, she was now a criminal. Eliza blew out the lantern. She had to get back to the house before her father woke up. The storm raged for 2 hours. battering the cabin as if trying to tear it from its foundation. Eliza had changed into a dry wool dress and was sitting by the cold hearth, pretending to mend a shirt. When the dogs started barking, these were not the friendly yips of greetings. They were the deep, throaty snarls of animals who smelled a predator. Eliza froze, the needle hovering over the fabric. She heard the squelch of hooves in the mud outside, then the heavy thud of boots on the porch. The door burst open without a knock. Wind and rain swirled into the room, extinguishing the single candle on the table. In the doorway stood 3 figures, backlit by the lightning that split the sky. "Silas Hart," a voice boomed. It was not Rusk. It was heavier, coarser. It belonged to Jarl Swanson, a man who hunted men for money and enjoyed his work too much. Eliza stood up, placing herself between the door and the bedroom where her father slept. "My father is asleep, Mr. Swanson, and a decent man knocks before entering." Swanson stepped into the room, water dripping from the brim of his hat. He was a giant of a man, with a beard that looked like a bird's nest made of iron wire. He carried a Winchester rifle in the crook of his arm. "Decency is for Sundays, Miss Eliza," Swanson sneered. "Tonight is for business. We tracked a runner to the riverbank, found footprints leading this way before the rain washed them out. 2 other men crowded in behind him. They were rough types, their eyes darting around the small cabin, evaluating the meager furniture, the empty cupboards. "We have seen no one," Eliza said, her voice steady. "The river is in flood. Anyone who went in there is dead." "Maybe," Swanson said. He walked closer, looming over her. He smelled of wet leather, tobacco, and old sweat. Or maybe he crawled out like a drowned rat. "This Indian is worth $100. Eliza, that is a lot of money for a ferryman who cannot pay his debts." The door to the bedroom creaked open. Silas Hart stumbled out, blinking in the gloom. He was wearing his long underwear, his hair standing up in tufts. He looked confused and terrified. Who is it?" Silas stammered. "Eliza. Just visitors. Papa," Eliza said quickly. Swanson laughed. "Visitors? That is a good one. Listen to me. Old man, Mr. Rusk sent us. He wants his property back, the Indian, and what the Indian stole." I do not know anything about an Indian," Silas said, his hands shaking. "Please, Jarl, I will have the money for Rusk next week. The soldiers are coming." "Shut your mouth about the money," Swanson snapped. He grabbed Silas by the front of his shirt and shoved him back against the wall. A plate rattled on the shelf and crashed to the floor. "We are searching the place. Barn, shed, root cellar. Every inch." Eliza's blood ran cold. "The woodshed." "You have no right," Eliza said, stepping forward. "This is private property." Swanson turned on her, his eyes narrowing. "Property belongs to those who can pay for it, girl. And from what I hear, your daddy does not own much of anything anymore. Maybe Rusk will take you as interest, like he said. You are pretty enough when you are not scowling." He signaled to the other 2 men. "Check the barn, and check under the floorboards of the ferry. I will look in the back." The men stomped out. Swanson glared at Eliza one last time, then turned and exited the back door, heading toward the animal pens and the woodshed. Eliza stood paralyzed. If he opened the shed door, if he saw the man, it was over. They would kill him right there, and they would arrest her and her father. She waited, counting the heartbeats. 1, 2, 10. She heard the barn door creak open. She heard the chickens squawking in panic. Then, she heard Swanson shouting over the wind. "Nothing here but wet wood and rat droppings. This door is jammed shut." Eliza let out a breath she did not know she was holding. She had bolted the shed door from the inside before climbing out the small window at the back. It must have held. 10 minutes later, the men returned to the porch. They were wet, angry, and empty-handed. "He must have drowned," one of the men grumbled. "No man swims the Little Colorado in flood." Swanson spat on the floorboards. "Rusk will not be happy. He wanted the papers." Eliza was standing in the shadows of the kitchen, pressing herself against the wall. She watched through the cracked window as the men mounted their horses. "Forget the Indian. the second man said. "He is fish food." "Why does the boss care so much about a dead savage?" Swanson lowered his voice, but the wind carried his words clearly to Eliza. "It is not the savage he cares about. It is the ledger page." Rusk said if that paper gets to the marshal in Prescott, the whole operation goes belly up. He said the Indian saw the transfer at the canyon, saw them loading the crates. "The government rifles?" "Shut up," Swanson hissed. "Do not say that out loud. Just keep riding. We checked the south bank." They spurred their horses and vanished into the rain. Eliza leaned against the wall, her legs trembling. Government rifles. Rusk was not just a crooked trader. He was stealing weapons from the army or selling them, and the man in her shed was the only witness. She waited until her father had passed out in his chair, the bottle of whiskey clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Then she pulled on her heavy oilskin coat and went back out into the storm. The woodshed was freezing. The man Tomas was awake. He was sitting up, his back against the stack of firewood. He had the Colt Peacemaker in his hand, though his grip was loose. When Eliza climbed back through the window, he raised the barrel slightly, then lowered it when he recognized her. "They are gone," Eliza said softly, keeping her hands where he could see them. "I heard them," he said. His voice was stronger, though still rough. "They were heavy-footed, like buffalo. They think you drowned." "Good." He looked at her, his dark eyes assessing. The fever seemed to have receded enough for him to think. "Why did you not give me to them? The reward is generous, is it not?" Eliza sat on an upturned crate. $100, she said. Thomas let out a short, bitter laugh. "I am worth more dead than I ever was alive. You could have paid your father's debt." "I heard them talking," Eliza said, ignoring his comment. "They said you stole a ledger page. They said you saw them loading government rifles." Thomas went still. He looked down at the gun in his lap. "I am a scout. Or I was. The army hired me to guide a supply train through the canyon. They said it was flour and blankets for the reservation." He looked up, and the pain in his eyes was not physical. "It was not flour. I saw a crate break open when a wheel hit a rock. It was full of repeating rifles. New ones. And crates of whiskey. Rusk was there, meeting with men who were not soldiers. They were selling the army's guns to others." "To who?" Eliza asked. "Does it matter?" Thomas asked. "Outlaws. Renegades. Anyone with gold. When Rusk saw that I had seen, he signaled his men. They grabbed me, tied me. They were going to shoot me, but they heard a patrol coming, so they threw me in the river to hide the body. They did not know I had snatched the page from the manifest while they were distracted." He tapped the oilskin packet that was now drying on the floor beside him. "This proves the weights were falsified. It proves the theft." Eliza looked at the packet. It was just a scrap of paper, but it was heavy enough to hang a man. "Rusk will burn this whole valley to find that," she said. "Yes," Tomas said, "which is why I must leave. Now." He tried to stand, bracing himself against the woodpile, but his legs buckled immediately. He slid back down, gasping, his hand clutching his side. "You are not going anywhere," Eliza said firmly. "That wound will open up if you walk 10 paces. You will bleed to death before you reach the tree line. If I stay, I bring the wolves to your door," Thomas said through gritted teeth. "Your father, he is weak. I heard him with the men. He will sell me to save himself." "My father is scared," Eliza defended him, though her heart knew he was right. "But he does not come out to the shed, and Rusk gave us 3 days. 3 days to pay the debt. And then he takes the ferry. And me." Thomas looked at her sharply. "He wants a wife," Eliza said, her voice bitter. "Or a housekeeper he does not have to pay. He offered to clear the debt if I agreed." Tomas stared at her. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the rain. He looked at the girl who had pulled him from the flood. This girl with the gray eyes and the stubborn chin. He saw the fear she was trying to hide, and the steel underneath it. "You have a choice, Eliza Hart," he said. using her name for the first time. It sounded strange on his tongue, accented and formal. You can go to town tomorrow. Tell the marshal I am here. Tell Rusk. You get the money. You save your home. You save yourself from him. And you? Eliza asked. I die, Thomas said simply. But that is the way of things. The strong eat the weak. Eliza stood up. She walked to the small window and looked out at the dark, wet world. She thought of the $500. She thought of her father's trembling hands. It would be so easy, just one word, and the nightmare would end. But then she thought of Rusk's hand touching her hair. She thought of the rifles being sold to kill innocent people. She thought of the law that allowed a man to buy a woman like a broodmare. She turned back to Thomas. We are not wolves. Mister, be gay, she said. And I am not Rusk. I do not sell people. She picked up the bucket of water and set it beside him. You stay here. I will bring you food in the morning. When the storm breaks, we will figure out how to get that paper to someone who will listen. Thomas looked at her, and for the first time, his expression softened. The suspicion did not vanish, but it made room for something else. Respect. My name is Thomas, he said quietly. Thomas Begay. I know, Eliza said. She put her hand on the door latch. Get some sleep. Thomas, you are safe here. Eliza, he called out as she opened the door. She paused. Thank you, he said. She nodded once, then slipped out into the rain. She had made her choice. She had defied the law, her father's safety, and the most powerful man in the territory. As she walked back to the cabin, the mud sucking at her boots, Eliza realized something terrifying and exhilarating. For 18 years, she had been drifting like a leaf on the river, going where the current took her. Tonight, for the first time, she had grabbed the oars, and she was rowing upstream. The rain had stopped, leaving the Arizona earth smelling of wet sage and bruised pine needles. In the 2 days since the storm, the woodshed had become a strange, suspended world, separate from the rest of the territory. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of Senora Elena's healing salve and the metallic tang of fear. Thomas Begay was healing with the resilience of a coyote. The fever that had burned through him on the first night had broken, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. He sat propped against the stack of cedar logs, cleaning his revolver with a rag Eliza had torn from an old petticoat. Eliza watched him from the doorway. She had brought him cornbread and dried beef, stolen from her own meager supper. You are moving too much, she said, her voice sharp with the anxiety that had become her constant companion. The stitches will pull. Thomas paused, his dark eyes meeting hers. I cannot sit still while Rusk's men ride the ridges. My stillness is their weapon. They have not come back, Eliza said, though she checked over her shoulder as she spoke. My father thinks the river took you. The town thinks you are dead. The dead do not stay dead for long in this country, Thomas said. He holstered the gun, wincing slightly as the movement stretched his wounded side. I need to leave tonight. The moon will be obscured by clouds. It is my best chance. You cannot walk 5 miles, let alone cross the canyon, Eliza countered. She stepped inside and pulled the door shut, barring the afternoon light. And even if you could, where would you go? Rusk has a bounty on you that would tempt a saint. You need a plan. Thomas, not just a horse and a prayer. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made Eliza feel both exposed and seen. Why do you care, Eliza Hart? You saved my life. Your debt to your conscience is paid. Let me go and take my bad luck with me. Eliza crossed her arms. Because it is not just about you anymore. I looked at that paper. Thomas, the oilskin packet. Thomas stiffened. I told you it was a shipping manifest. It is half a manifest, Eliza corrected. But I know numbers. I helped my father with the toll books. The numbers on that page, 50 crates of mining equipment, weight 400 pounds each. But the note at the bottom says, Standard Army issue. Mining picks do not come from the Army. Thomas. And they do not weigh exactly the same as a crate of Winchester repeaters. Thomas let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping. You are too smart for your own good. It is a dangerous thing. Tell me, she demanded. If I am to hide a fugitive, I want to know exactly what I am hiding him from. It is not just the guns, Tomas said quietly. The guns are the currency. The land is the prize. He picked up a piece of kindling and drew a rough map in the dirt floor. Rusk is selling rifles to renegade bands, men who have been pushed off the reservation and are angry. He wants them to fight. He wants a war. Why? Eliza asked, horrified. War ruins trade. Not this trade, Tomas said grimly. If there is violence, the army will come down hard. They will clear the remaining Dayan families from the water sources near the canyon, claiming it is for public safety. And who do you think is waiting to buy the land deeds for pennies when the people are forced out? Rusk, Eliza whispered. He has the surveyor in his pocket. Tomas explained. And he has falsified the maps. That paper you hold. It proves the guns were diverted, but it also has the coordinates of the water springs he plans to steal. He needs that paper to make his fake deeds match the army surveys. Eliza felt a cold knot in her stomach. It all made sense. The pressure on her father, the sudden enforcement of debts. Rusk was clearing the board. He was removing anyone who owned land along the river and the canyon. Her father was just another obstacle to be removed, another acre to be seized. He is not just a thief, Eliza said, her voice trembling with anger. He is a monster. He is a businessman, Tomas corrected, his voice devoid of bitterness, flat with the reality of it. In the West, they are often the same thing. That afternoon, the tension in the main house was suffocating. Silas Hart was pacing the floorboards, a fresh bottle of whiskey on the table. He comes tomorrow. Eliza, Silas muttered, wiping his brow with a shaking hand. 3 days. That is what he said. I have counted the coins in the tin. We are short. We are so short. We will find a way, Papa, Eliza said, though she knew it was a lie. There was no way to find $500 in 24 hours. Maybe. Silas stopped, looking at his daughter with watery, desperate eyes. Maybe his offer about the marriage, it would not be so bad. Eliza, he is a rich man. You would have silk dresses. You would not have to scrub floors. Eliza set down the bowl of peas she was shelling. The sound was like a gavel striking wood. I would rather scrub floors until my hands bleed than marry a man who buys people like cattle. Papa, do not ask me that. Never ask me that. Silas flinched, looking away. I just want you to be safe. The world is hard for a woman alone. The world is hard for everyone, Eliza said. But selling your soul does not make it softer. It just makes it heavier. She left the house, needing air. Near the corral, she saw Toby, the young messenger boy, watering his mule. He looked pale, his usual grin replaced by a nervous twitch. Miss Eliza, he whispered as she approached. I saw them again. Who, Toby? Rusk's men. Last night, I was cutting through the ridge trail, trying to make time. They were up by the old mine shaft. They were moving crates, heavy ones. Toby leaned in closer. And I saw the Indian agent there, the government man. He was laughing with Rusk. Eliza's blood went cold. If the Indian agent was involved, there was no one in the local law enforcement she could trust. Rusk had bought the law. Did they see you? Eliza asked. No, I hid in the brush. But Miss Eliza, they were talking about the ferry, Rusk said. Tomorrow we take the crossing, one way or another. Eliza squeezed the boy's shoulder. Thank you, Toby. You are a brave young man. Now ride to the fort. Stay away from the trading post. She walked back toward the river, her mind racing. Rusk wasn't waiting for the debt to be paid. He was coming to take the ferry tomorrow. He needed control of the crossing to move his illegal guns without scrutiny. Her father's debt was just the excuse. She went to the woodshed. Thomas was standing now, testing his weight on his injured leg. He looked up as she entered. We have to go, Eliza said breathlessly. I know. Thomas said, I can feel the change in the air. No, I mean we, Eliza said. I am going with you. Thomas shook his head violently. No, absolutely not. The canyon is dangerous. The nights are freezing. And if we are caught together... If I stay here, Eliza interrupted, her voice steady. Rusk will take the ferry tomorrow. He will throw my father out. or worse, and he will force me to marry him to legitimize his claim on the land. I will not be a pawn in his game. Tomas, I am the only one who knows the high trails as well as you do. You cannot climb the North Ridge with that leg. You need a guide. I am a scout. Tomas growled. I do not need a white girl to show me the rocks. You need a friend, Eliza shot back. And right now, I am the only one you have. Besides, we need proof, real proof. That ledger page is half a puzzle. Where is the other half? In Rusk's private office at the trading post, Tomas said. In the main book. Then we cannot get it yet, Eliza reasoned. We need help. You mentioned an elder, someone who knows the old treaties, someone who can prove the water rights belong to your people, not the army. Tomas hesitated. Grandfather Hastian. He lives in the Hidden Valley. 2 days' ride through the labyrinth. Take me to him, Eliza said. We get his testimony, we get the map of the true springs, then we come back and finish Rusk. Tomas looked at her for a long minute. He saw the fire in her eyes, the set of her jaw. She was not the trembling girl who had pulled him from the water anymore. She was something new, something forged in the heat of necessity. If you come, Tomas said slowly, there is no going back. You will be branded a traitor to your race. The town will spit on your name. Let them spit, Eliza said. I am tired of trying to please people who only want to use me. They left at dusk, slipping away while Silas snored in his chair, and the river churned black and endless beside them. They took 2 horses from the corral, Eliza's mare, Bess, and an older gelding for Thomas. The path to the canyon was treacherous. The moonlight was fitful, obscured by drifting clouds that promised more rain. They rode in silence, the only sounds the clatter of hooves on stone and the cry of a distant owl. As they ascended the ridge, the air grew thin and cold. The pine trees gave way to twisted juniper and vast, looming rock formations that looked like the bones of the earth. Eliza led the way. She knew a deer trail that bypassed the main checkpoints where Rusk's hired guns would be watching. It was narrow, skirting the edge of a 300-foot drop into the dark void of the gorge. Watch the loose shale, she called back softly. It slides. Thomas grunted in acknowledgement. He was riding slumped in the saddle, the pain clearly gnawing at him, but he did not complain. Around midnight, the wind picked up, cutting through Eliza's wool coat like a knife. The horses were skittish. Bess pinned her ears back and danced sideways. Steady, Eliza murmured. She smells something, Tomas said, his voice low. He pulled the coat from his belt. They halted. In the silence, Eliza heard a low, rasping cough from the darkness above them. A mountain lion. Do not look up, Thomas whispered. Keep moving, slowly. If we run, it chases. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her eyes on the trail, forcing her hands to be light on the reins. The presence of the predator was a physical weight on the back of her neck. They rode for what felt like an hour, the invisible eyes watching them, until finally, the terrain opened up into a small box canyon protected from the wind. We stop here, Tomas said. The horses need rest, and you are shaking. Eliza slid from the saddle, her knees buckling. She was freezing. The desert night was a cruel paradox to the heat of the day. They found a shallow overhang in the canyon wall, a natural shelter scooped out by wind and time. There was no wood for a fire, and even if there were, they dared not light one. Tomas unsaddled the horses and hobbled them. He brought the saddle blankets and the heavy wool roll he had tied behind his cantle. Eliza sat against the rock wall, hugging her knees. Her teeth were chattering uncontrollably. The cold seemed to seep into her marrow. Thomas approached her. In the gloom, he looked formidable, a part of the landscape itself. He hesitated, then dropped the heavy wool blanket over her. It is not enough, he said. He sat down beside her, close but not touching. The stone sucks the heat from you. Eliza looked at him. He was shivering too, though he tried to hide it. His buckskin shirt was thin protection. You will freeze too, she said. I am used to it. He lied. Do not be a fool, Eliza said. She lifted the edge of the blanket. There is room. Thomas went still. To share a blanket was an intimacy that transcended words. In her world, it was scandalous. In his, it was survival. But it was also something more. He moved closer. He did not touch her with his hands, but he shifted so that his side pressed against hers, shoulder to hip. He pulled the blanket around them both, creating a small, warm cocoon against the vast, freezing night. Eliza felt the heat of his body radiating through his clothes. It was shocking how warm he was. She could smell the scent of him wood smoke, leather, and the clean, sharp smell of rain. They sat in silence for a long time. The wind howled outside their small shelter, impotent against the rock. Your heart is beating fast, Thomas said softly. The observation was not a taunt. It was a statement of fact. He could feel it against his arm. I am scared, Eliza admitted. Of the cougar, of Rusk, of what happens tomorrow. Fear is good, Thomas said. Fear keeps you awake. Only the arrogant sleep deep in the canyon. He shifted slightly, and his hand brushed hers where it rested on her knee. He did not pull away. His hand was rough, calloused, but warm. Why did you pull me out? He asked. It was the question he had been holding back for 2 days. You knew the river. You knew the danger. I saw a man, Eliza said. I did not see a warrior or a bounty. I just saw a man who was drowning. And now, Thomas turned his head. His face was inches from hers in the dark. She could feel his breath, warm on her cheek. What do you see now? Eliza looked into his eyes. They were not bottomless anymore. They were human. They were filled with pain and gratitude, and a question she was not sure she could answer. I see a man who was betrayed, she whispered, and I see the only person who is telling me the truth. Thomas held her gaze. The air between them crackled, charged with something more dangerous than lightning. He leaned in, just a fraction of an inch. Eliza's breath hitched. She wanted him to close the distance. She wanted to know if his mouth was as warm as his shoulder. But Thomas pulled back. He turned his head to stare out at the dark canyon. Sleep, Eliza, he said, his voice rougher than before. We ride at first light. If we are to reach the elder, we need our strength. He did not move away, though he stayed pressed against her, a solid wall of heat and protection. Eliza closed her eyes, but sleep was a long time coming. She listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady and deep. She realized with a jolt of panic that the innocent girl who dreamed of teaching children was dying out here in the canyon. She was changing, and the man beside her, this warrior from a world she had been told to fear, was the catalyst. Thomas, she whispered into the dark. I am here, he answered instantly. If we get the proof, will it matter? Will they listen to an Indian and a fairy girl? Truth is like a river, Thomas said. It cuts through the heart of stone eventually, but sometimes you have to help it flood. Eliza drifted off with that image in her mind, a flood of truth, a flood that would wash away Rusk, the debts, and the lies. But as she slept, her hand unconsciously found his under the blanket, her fingers curling around his, and in his sleep. Thomas did not pull away. He held on, as if she were the only anchor in a world that was trying to sweep him away. The hidden valley of the Dine was nothing like the frightening stories the men in the saloon told over whiskey. It was not a place of savage rituals or darkness. It was a place of rhythm, hard work, and sunlight. As Eliza Hart rode best down the narrow switchback trail behind Thomas, she saw hogans built of red earth and cedar logs, their doors facing east to greet the dawn. She saw women weaving intricate blankets on upright looms, their fingers moving with the speed of hummingbirds. She saw children herding sheep through the sagebrush, their laughter sharp and clear in the thin mountain air. It was a community that lived by laws older than the United States Army, laws written in the stone and the stars. But she was an intruder here. She felt it in the heavy silence that fell as they rode past the central fire. Eyes watched her, dark, unblinking, and guarded. She was not just a woman. She was a representative of the people who built fences across open range and diverted water into muddy ditches. Tomas stopped his horse in front of a larger hogan where an old man sat on a sheepskin rug, smoking a pipe carved from river willow. This was Hastian, the elder Tomas had spoken of. His face was a map of deep canyons, weathered by 80 years of sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp as flint. Tomas dismounted and spoke in his native tongue, his voice low and respectful. He gestured to Eliza, then to his wounded side, then to the south where the town lay. Hastian listened without moving. When Tomas finished, the old man looked at Eliza. "He says you pulled him from the red water," Hastian said. His English was slow, deliberate, and perfectly clear. "He says you are different from the others. He says you want to stop the man called Rusk." "I do," Eliza said, sliding off her mare. Her legs ached from the ride, but she stood tall. "Rusk is hurting my family too. He is stealing your water and my father's livelihood." Hastian studied her. "Many white men have come here saying they want to help. They use us as a shield. They hide behind our grievances to fight their own battles. When the bullets fly, they duck, and my people bleed. Are you a shield, girl from the river?" "I am not a shield," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "And I am not hiding. I am standing right here." "To stand here is easy," Hastian said, tapping the ash from his pipe. "To stand down there, where the law is bought and sold, that is hard. If we give you the map of the true springs, if we give you our voice, you become the target. Rusk will not just come for the dine. He will come for you. Are you ready to bleed for a land that is not yours?" Eliza thought of the ferry. She thought of the children she wanted to teach. She thought of the way Rusk looked at her, as if she were a piece of livestock. "The land may not be mine," Eliza answered. "But the truth is, and I am willing to bleed for that." Hastian nodded once, a slow, decisive movement. "Then we will help. But know this once you take our truth into your world. You can never go back to being just a girl on a boat. You will be a bridge, and bridges are walked upon." They spent the day in the valley. Hastian provided the locations of the ancestral springs, marking them on a piece of tanned hide that contradicted the army surveyor's maps. It was proof that Rusk's claim to the water rights was based on fraud. But as the sun began to dip below the canyon walls, painting the rock in violent shades of crimson, Tomas came to Eliza. He looked grim. "We have the map," he said. "But it is not enough. A judge in Prescott might look at an Indian map and laugh. We need the rest of that ledger page. We need to link Rusk directly to the theft of the rifles." "Then we go back," Eliza said. "There is news from town," Tomas warned. "A sheepherder came in an hour ago. He had been to the trading post." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Tell me," Eliza demanded. "The town is saying you are a traitor," Tomas said, his voice flat with suppressed anger. "They say you lured a Christian man to his death and ran off with a savage killer. The parson has barred your name from the prayer list. And your father, Rusk, has been to see him." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. What did Rusk do? "He did not hurt him. He made him an offer. He told the town he is a benevolent man. He said he would forgive the entire debt, every cent, if your father convinces you to return and be agreeable." "Agreeable." Eliza spat the word out. It tasted like bile. "There is more," Tomas said softly. The sheepherder heard Rusk laughing with his men. "He said he does not even need your consent. He said he has a paper." Eliza stared at him. "What paper?" "We need to find out," Tomas said. "Tonight." The ride back to the settlement was a blur of shadows and fear. They left the horses tied in a dense thicket of scrub oak a mile outside of town and proceeded on foot. The moon was obscured by heavy clouds, granting them the cover they needed. They did not go to the ferry. Instead, they crept to the back of the trading post. It was a sprawling log building that served as the heart of the town's commerce and corruption. The main store was dark, but a light burned in the rear office. Eliza knew the layout. She had been here 100 times to buy flour and nails. "The window," she whispered to Tomas. "The latch is loose. I noticed it last week." Thomas boosted her up. She slid the blade of her pocket knife between the sash and the sill. Lifting the latch with a silent click, she climbed inside, and Thomas followed, landing on the floor with the silent grace of a cat. The office smelled of stale tobacco and ink. A heavy oak desk dominated the room. On the wall hung a map of the territory, stuck through with pins. "The ledger," Thomas whispered, moving toward a large iron safe in the corner. "It will be in there, or on the desk." Eliza began to sift through the papers on the desk. Bills of sale, cattle tallies, wanted posters. Her hand froze on a document lying open near the inkwell. It was a loan agreement, dated 2 years ago. It bore her father's shaky signature, but it was the clause at the bottom, written in dense legal phrasing, that made her breath stop. In the event of default, the debtor agrees to surrender all property, real and personal, including the guardianship and marital rights of his daughter, Eliza Jane Hart, to the creditor, Caleb Rusk, as settlement in full. Eliza read it twice. The words swam before her eyes. Her father had not just borrowed money. He had put her up as collateral. He had signed a paper that turned her into currency. Eliza. Thomas was beside her. He saw her face, pale and stricken in the dim light. He looked down at the paper. He did not need to read all the words to understand. He saw the signature. He saw Rusk's name. And he saw the look in Eliza's eyes, a look of someone whose entire world had just shattered. She was not a person anymore. She was a thing to be traded for a ferry boat and a few $100s. "He knew," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. "Papa knew." "Perhaps he did not understand the words," Thomas said, though his voice was hard. "These men use words like snares." "He signed it," Eliza said, tears pricking her eyes. "He sold me. Thomas, I'm just a line in a ledger." She slumped against the desk, the fight draining out of her. All her dreams of teaching, of healing, of being someone who mattered, it was all a joke. She was just property. Thomas reached out and took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were blazing with a cold, fierce light. It was not pity she saw there. It was fury. "You are not a line in a book," he hissed. "You are the woman who swam the flood. You are the woman who walked into the canyon." He reached into his boot and pulled out a knife. It was not a kitchen tool. It was a blade of polished steel, sharp enough to shave with, the handle wrapped in leather. He pressed the handle into her hand, closing her fingers around it. "Take it," he commanded. Eliza looked at the weapon, feeling its weight. "They use paper to take your life," Thomas said. "They use laws written in rooms you are not allowed to enter. But out here, Eliza, the only law is what you can hold. Do not let them tell you what you are." He leaned closer, his voice a low growl. "A choice without power is just a beg. Choice must have teeth. This is your tooth." Eliza gripped the knife. The cold leather warmed against her palm. She looked at the paper on the desk, the paper that said she belonged to Caleb Rusk. She raised the knife and stabbed it down, pinning the document to the desk. The sound was loud in the quiet room. She slashed through the paper, tearing her father's signature in half. "I am not his," she said. Her voice was steady again. "I belong to no one." "Good," Thomas said. "Now let us find the book." He moved to the bookshelf behind the desk. "Here." He pulled down a thick, leather-bound volume. Shipping Manifests 1880 to 1882. He opened it, flipping through the pages rapidly. April, May, June. Here. He pointed to a page where a jagged strip had been torn out. He pulled the oilskin packet from his pocket and held the scrap of paper against the tear. It was a perfect match. The page listed the mining tools. The scrap listed the true weight and the Army issue designation. Together, they proved that 50 crates of rifles had arrived at this post and vanished. "We have it," Eliza breathed. Suddenly, a dog barked outside. Then came the sound of heavy boots on the boardwalk. "Lights!" a voice shouted. It was Swanson. "I saw a light in the office. Go!" Thomas shoved the ledger into his shirt. They scrambled for the window. Thomas vaulted out first, turning to catch Eliza, but as she swung her leg over the sill, The office door burst open. Swanson stood there, a lantern in one hand and a pistol in the other. "Well, well," he sneered. "The little bird comes home to the cage." He raised the pistol. Eliza did not freeze. She had the knife in her hand. She grabbed a heavy glass inkwell from the desk and hurled it with all her strength. It smashed against the doorframe, spraying black ink over Swanson's face. He roared, firing blindly. The bullet shattered the window pane above Eliza's head. She dropped to the ground outside. Tomas grabbed her hand. "Run!" They sprinted through the muddy alleyway behind the store. Shouts erupted from the street. More men were coming. "To the roof!" Tomas yelled, pointing to a stack of crates against the livery stable. They scrambled up the crates, hauling themselves onto the low, slanted roof of the stable. Below them, men with torches were flooding into the alley. "There on the roof!" A bullet whizzed past Eliza's ear, thudding into the wooden sign of the stable. Splinters sprayed her cheek. "Keep low," Thomas commanded. They ran along the roofline, their boots slipping on the damp shingles. At the end of the stable, there was a gap of 6 feet to the next building, the saloon. "Jump!" Thomas shouted. He leaped, landing in a roll on the flat roof of the saloon. Eliza hesitated for a heartbeat, looking at the dark drop between the buildings. Then she heard Swanson's heavy breathing behind her as he climbed the crates. She jumped. She landed hard, her knees banging against the gravel roof. But Tomas caught her arm and pulled her up. They raced across the saloon roof and slid down a drainage pipe on the far side, landing in the dust of the main street, just yards from the thicket where they had left the horses. Bullets kicked up the dirt around their feet. "Get to the horses!" Tomas yelled, turning to fire 2 shots from his peacemaker to cover her. Eliza reached Bess, untying the reins with frantic fingers. She swung into the saddle just as Tomas mounted his gelding. They spurred the horses into a gallop, tearing out of town toward the river road. The shouts and gunfire faded behind them, swallowed by the darkness and the thundering of hooves. They did not stop until they reached the crossing at Stone Creek, 5 miles away. The horses were blown, their sides heaving. Eliza slid from the saddle, her legs shaking so hard they would barely hold her. She collapsed onto the grassy bank of the creek, gasping for air. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving her lightheaded and trembling. Tomas was beside her in an instant. "Are you hit?" "No," Eliza managed to say. "No, you—" "I am fine," he said. He checked Bess's flanks, then his own horse. They did not follow past the ridge. "We are safe for the moment." Eliza looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of moon. She looked at her hands. They were covered in soot and ink, and she was still clutching the knife Tomas had given her. She started to laugh. It was a hysterical, jagged sound. "We stole it. We actually stole the book." "We took back the truth," Tomas said. He sat down on a rock near her, watching her closely. "You did well, Eliza. You have the heart of a warrior." Eliza looked at him. The laughter died in her throat. She looked at the man who had given her a weapon when her own father had sold her. She looked at the blood on his bandage, the fierce set of his jaw, the dark eyes that saw her not as property, but as an equal. The distance between them felt suddenly non-existent. She stood up and took a step toward him. Thomas stood too. "Eliza," he warned softly. "We are not—" She did not let him finish. She reached up, grabbing the lapels of his buckskin jacket, and pulled him down to her. She kissed him. It was not a graceful kiss. It was desperate, tasting of rain and fear and the metallic tang of adrenaline. It was a kiss of 2 people who had just looked death in the face and decided they preferred life. For a second, Thomas stood rigid, surprised. Then, with a low groan, his arms went around her, pulling her crushed against his chest. He kissed her back, hard and sure, his hand tangled in her hair, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. They broke apart, breathless. The only sound was the gurgling of the creek and the panting of the horses. Eliza stepped back, her hand touching her lips. She was trembling, but not from cold. She started, but the words failed her. Tomas looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable in the moonlight. He did not apologize. He did not make a joke. He reached out and gently took the knife from her hand, sheathing it at her belt. "Now," he said, his voice rough. "Everything is real." Eliza nodded. Yes, it was real. The danger, the theft, the betrayal, and this pull between them that was stronger than the river current. Tomas went to his saddlebags and pulled out the ledger. He opened it to the torn page and placed the scrap he had carried for days into the gap. "It fits," he said. "Here, look at this name in the margin." Eliza looked. Written in the column for authorized by was a signature Agent P. Miller. "The Indian agent," Eliza said. Toby was right. The government man who is supposed to protect the tribes is selling their future to Rusk. "This hangs them all," Tomas said. "Rusk, Miller, Swanson." He closed the book with a heavy thud. "We have to take this to the marshal in Prescott," Eliza said. "It is 2 days' ride. It will be a hard ride," Tomas said. "Swanson will not stop now. He knows we have the book. He knows we are together." He stepped closer to her again. He did not touch her, but the heat of his presence wrapped around her. "Eliza," he said, "when we get to Prescott, when this is over, you will be free. Your father's debt will be void. You can go back to the ferry. You can teach your school." Eliza looked down at her boots. "I do not think I can be that girl anymore. Tomas, I burned that bridge when I threw that inkwell." Tomas reached out and lifted her chin, just as he had in the office. "Then listen to me," he said. His voice was solemn. A vow spoken to the night. "If you walk this path to the end, if we survive this, I will not just save you from Rusk." He paused, searching her eyes. "I will choose you," he said. "Not as a debt, not as a duty. I will choose you as part of my life." "As my destiny, if you will have me." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Destiny. It was a big word, a frightening word. But looking at him, standing tall and scarred under the Arizona moon, she knew there was no other word for it. "I am not looking for a savior. Tomas," she whispered. "I am looking for a partner." "Then mount up. Partner," Tomas said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We have a long ride to justice." Eliza climbed back onto Bess. She touched the handle of the knife at her waist. She felt the weight of the ledger in Tomas's saddlebag, and she felt the ghost of his kiss on her lips. She was not the innocent girl who had pulled a body from the river. She was Eliza Hart, and she was riding into the storm, not away from it. The road to Prescott was a ribbon of mud that wound through the chaparral, and it was there, just 5 miles from the safety of the federal marshal, that the trap snapped shut. It was not a clever ambush. It was brute force. Jarl Swanson and 6 men rode out of the scrub oak, their rifles leveled. There was no words exchanged, only the crack of a warning shot that sent dirt spraying into the face of Eliza's mare. Bess reared, screaming, and Eliza was thrown hard into the mud. She scrambled up, reaching for the knife at her belt, but a boot slammed into her shoulder, pinning her down. "Do not shoot the Indian," Swanson roared as his men raised their guns toward Tomas. "Rusk wants him alive for the show. Rope him." But Tomas was already moving. He spurred his gelding not away from them, but directly at the weakest point in their line, a young hired gun on a skittish roan. Tomas collided with the man, sending horse and rider stumbling, and broke through the circle. "Let him go," Swanson yelled. Seeing his men turn to give chase, he reached down and grabbed Eliza by her hair, hauling her to her feet. "He will come back. A dog always comes back for its bone." Eliza fought, kicking and scratching, but Swanson was an iron wall. He bound her hands with the rough hemp and threw her over the saddle of his horse like a sack of grain. "You are going to a wedding, Miss Hart," Swanson sneered. "And a funeral, 2 for the price of 1. The ferry landing had been transformed into a theater of cruelty. The rain had returned, a cold, relentless downpour that turned the riverbank into a quagmire. The little Colorado was swollen, its roar competing with the murmur of the crowd Rusk had assembled. He had dragged everyone from the settlement, the miners, The farmers, the saloon girls, even the reluctant Parson Miller. They stood in a semicircle, huddled under oilskins, watching the scene by the toll house. A rope had been thrown over the thick branch of the ancient cottonwood tree, the same tree Eliza had tied her rescue line to days ago. Beneath it stood a barrel. Caleb Rusk stood on the porch of the toll house, dry and immaculate in a long duster coat. Beside him stood Silas Hart, looking like a man whose soul had already departed his body. And next to Silas was the Indian agent, Percival Miller, looking nervous and checking his pocket watch repeatedly. When Swanson rode in with Eliza, a ripple went through the crowd. He dumped her into the mud at Rusk's feet. Eliza gasped, struggling to her knees. She looked up at Rusk. He looked like a king surveying his subjects. "Behold," Rusk shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. "The prodigal daughter returns. And look at her, muddy, wild, corrupted by the company of savages." He stepped down and grabbed Eliza's arm, pulling her up roughly. "We are here to see justice done," Rusk proclaimed. "This woman was kidnapped, brainwashed, forced to aid a murderer who stole government property. But I am a forgiving man. I have brought her home." He turned to Silas. "Mr. Hart, tell your daughter the good news." Silas could barely speak. He trembled, his eyes fixed on the muddy ground. "Eliza, Mr. Rusk has offered. He has offered to clear the debt, all of it, $500, and he will take you as his wife. Today, to save your reputation." "And the Indian?" Eliza demanded, her voice cutting through the rain. "Where is he?" "The murderer Begay is a fugitive," Rusk said smoothly. "When he arrives, and he will arrive, because he thinks he is a hero, he will hang. It is the law. He killed 2 men at the canyon. Agent Miller here has certified the report." Eliza looked at Agent Miller. The little man refused to meet her eyes. "You are a liar!" Eliza shouted. She turned to the crowd. "He is lying to all of you. There was no murder. Rusk is stealing the army rifles and selling them to renegades. He is stealing your water rights." "She is hysterical," Rusk said, tightening his grip on her arm until she cried out. The savage turned her mind. "Parson, get the Bible. We will perform the ceremony now. Once she is a respectable married woman, this madness will pass." "I will not marry you," Eliza screamed. "I would rather die." "That can be arranged," Rusk whispered in her ear, too low for the crowd to hear. "But not you, my dear, your father. If you do not say, 'I do,' the old man goes in the river. Accidentally, of course." Eliza froze. She looked at her father. He was broken, useless, but he was still her father. "Tie her to the post," Rusk ordered Swanson. "We will wait for the guest of honor." They tied Eliza to the porch support. She stood there, shivering, the rain plastering her hair to her face. She scanned the tree line, praying Thomas would not come, and praying that he would. 10 minutes later, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. It was Tomas. He rode slowly, his hands raised. He stopped his horse at the edge of the clearing and dismounted. He walked toward the ferry landing, limping slightly. "I am here, Rusk," Thomas called out. "Let her go." "Ah, the hero," Rusk smiled. "Seize him!" Swanson and 3 men rushed Tomas. He did not fight. He let them disarm him, strip the gun belt from his waist, and drag him to the cottonwood tree. They forced him up onto the barrel. Swanson placed the noose around his neck. The crowd murmured. Uneasy. Hanging a man without a trial was one thing. Hanging a man who had surrendered peacefully was another. "This man," Rusk announced, pointing a gloved finger at Tomas, "is a thief and a killer. He attacked a federal supply train. He stole weapons meant for our protection. Tell them about the whiskey." "Rusk," Thomas shouted, the rope scratching his throat. "Tell them about the land deeds you falsified." "Gag him," Rusk snapped. Swanson shoved a rag into Thomas's mouth. Rusk turned back to Eliza. "Now, my dear, the choice is yours. Sign the marriage certificate, and your father lives in comfort. Refuse, and you'll watch your lover kick his life away. And then your father takes a swim." He motioned to Agent Miller, who stepped forward with a document and a pen. Eliza looked at Tomas. He was standing tall on the barrel, his eyes locked on hers. There was no fear in them, only a fierce, burning command. Fight! Eliza looked at the paper. Then she looked at the saddlebag on Swanson's horse, which was tethered just a few feet away. Swanson had taken the ledger from them, but he hadn't destroyed it yet. He had stuffed it in his saddlebag, likely to give to Rusk later. "I will sign," Eliza said softly, "but unbind my hands." Rusk nodded to Swanson. "Cut the rope." Swanson sliced the hemp binding her wrists. Eliza rubbed her chafed skin. She took the pen Agent Miller offered. She leaned over the table they had set up on the porch. Then, with a speed born of desperation, she grabbed the heavy glass inkwell on the table and smashed it into Agent Miller's face. The agent screamed, clutching his eyes, and dropped to his knees. Eliza did not wait. She lunged off the porch, sprinting toward Swanson's horse. She tore the saddlebag open and ripped out the ledger book. "Stop her!" Rusk screamed. Swanson raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a gunshot rang out from the river. But it did not come from Swanson. Tomas had kicked the barrel away, but instead of hanging, he had swung his legs up, catching the branch above him with his bound hands. He pulled himself up, the rope going slack, and swung his body like a pendulum, slamming his boots into Swanson's chest. Swanson went down, his rifle firing into the mud. Tomas dropped to the ground, tearing the noose from his neck. He was unarmed, surrounded, and wounded. "Eliza read it," Tomas roared, charging the nearest gunman. Eliza stood in the center of the mud, the rain washing the ink from her hands. She held the ledger up like a shield. "Listen to me," she screamed at the crowd, the townspeople, who had started to scatter at the gunfire. Froze. "This is Rusk's own book," Eliza shouted. She opened to the torn page. "May the 4th, 1882, 50 crates. Army issue repeating rifles. Weight 20,000 pounds. Destination the Northern Canyon." She pointed a shaking finger at Rusk. "He did not buy mining tools. He stole guns from the fort. And look at the signature authorized by Agent Percival Miller." The crowd turned to look at the agent, who was groaning on the porch, ink and blood streaming down his face. "It is a lie," Rusk bellowed. He pulled a silver-plated revolver from his coat. "She is mad, shoot her." But his men hesitated. The words, "Army issue," and the specific weight had struck a chord. These were men who knew shipping. They knew a mining pick did not weigh the same as a rifle. "I said shoot her!" Rusk screamed. When no one moved, Rusk leveled his own gun at Eliza. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, hate-filled desperation. He was not a businessman anymore. He was a cornered rat. "Goodbye, Eliza," he hissed. He pulled the trigger. Eliza flinched, expecting the darkness, but a shadow moved in front of her. Tomas had broken away from the brawl. He threw himself between Eliza and the bullet. The impact spun him around. He hit the mud hard, clutching his side, not the old wound, but a new one, high in the shoulder. "No!" Eliza screamed. She dropped the book and fell to her knees beside him. Silence descended on the ferry landing. It was heavy and terrible. Caleb Rusk stood there, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. He had just shot an unarmed man who was protecting a woman. He attacked me," Rusk stammered, looking around at the crowd. "You saw it. Self-defense." "That was not self-defense. Caleb," a deep voice rumbled. It was the sheriff. He had been standing at the back, quiet, letting Rusk run his show. But now he stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his peacemaker. "You shot a man who was unarmed," the sheriff said. "And you tried to kill a girl who was reading a book." "She is lying," Rusk shouted, backing up toward the toll house. "The book is a forgery." "The numbers are not," came another voice. It was the blacksmith, a burly man who had often repaired Rusk's wagons. "I fixed an axle on that shipment. Rusk, those crates were heavy, too heavy for picks, and they were marked with the U.S. stamp. I saw it." The crowd began to move. It was a slow, shifting tide. turning against the man who had held them in debt and fear for years. "Seize him!" someone shouted. Rusk panicked. He swung his gun toward the sheriff, but before he could cock the hammer, a wet slap of rope hit his wrist. Eliza had grabbed the coil of ferry line lying on the deck. She whipped the heavy, wet rope with all the strength of 18 years of hauling boats. The knot struck Rusk's hand, shattering his grip. The gun flew into the mud. Rusk howled, clutching his wrist. He turned to run, scrambling for his horse. "Thomas!" Eliza cried. Thomas was struggling to stand. Blood was soaking the front of his buckskin shirt, but his eyes were clear. He picked up Swanson's discarded Winchester from the mud. He racked the lever. Clack, clack. He aimed at Rusk's retreating back. "Shoot him!" Silas Hart yelled from the porch, finding his voice for the first time in years. "Kill him, boy." The crowd waited for the shot. It was the way of the West. Blood for blood. Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. He had every right. Rusk had hunted him, framed him, and tried to kill the woman he loved. But then Thomas looked at Eliza. She was kneeling in the mud, watching him. She was not screaming for blood. She was just watching. If he killed Rusk now, he proved Rusk right. He became the savage. He became the killer. Thomas lowered the rifle. He aimed at Rusk's horse instead. Bang! The bullet struck the dirt right under the stallion's hooves. The horse reared violently, throwing Rusk backward into the churned-up muck of the riverbank. Rusk tried to scramble up, slipping and sliding, covered in the red filth of the river he had tried to steal. Thomas walked over to him. He did not look like a victim. He looked like judgment carved from granite. He pressed the barrel of the rifle into Rusk's chest, pinning him to the ground. "I am not you," Thomas said, his voice low and hard, audible only to Rusk and Eliza. "I do not kill for profit, and I do not kill out of fear." He looked up at the sheriff. "Sheriff, take this man, and take the book. If you lose it, I will come back, and next time, I will not miss the horse." The sheriff stepped forward, pulling a pair of iron cuffs from his belt. He hauled Rusk up. The once elegant trader was now a mud-caked wretch, shivering and defeated. "Caleb Rusk," the sheriff said, "you are under arrest for the theft of government property, attempted murder and fraud." Two deputies grabbed Agent Miller, who was still weeping over his ink-blinded eyes. Eliza stood up. Her dress was ruined. Her hair was wild. She was bleeding from a cut on her cheek, but she felt lighter than she had ever felt in her life. She walked over to the porch where the marriage contract still lay on the table. Beside it was the debt paper Rusk had brought to taunt her father. She picked up the debt paper. She held it up so her father could see. "Papa," she said, "look." She tore the paper in half, then in quarters. Then she threw the pieces into the wind. They fluttered away like white moths, disappearing into the swollen river. "It is done," she said. Silas Hart slumped against the wall, weeping openly. Not out of fear this time, but out of shame and relief. Eliza turned to Thomas. He was leaning against the hitching post, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. She ran to him, ignoring the stares of the townspeople. "You are hurt," she said, her hands hovering over the wound. "It is just a hole," Thomas grunted, though his face was pale. "I have had worse. You could have killed him," Eliza whispered. "Yes," Thomas said. He looked at Rusk being dragged away toward the town jail. "But then I would have to carry his ghost. I want my hands free." He looked at her, his dark eyes softening. "I want them free to hold my future." The rain began to slow, the storm breaking as quickly as it had come. The clouds parted in the west, letting a shaft of golden late-afternoon light strike the river. The ferry boat rocked gently in the current, its cables singing in the wind. Eliza stood beside Thomas, her shoulder brushing his good arm. She looked at the faces in the crowd. Some looked away in shame. Others nodded with newfound respect. She was not the girl who collected driftwood anymore. She was the woman who had brought down the mountain. "Come," she said to Thomas, slipping her arm around his waist to support him. "Let us go home. I have a lot of willow bark to brew. Thomas leaned on her. Just a little. Home, he repeated. The word sounded strange, but good. They walked together toward the cabin, leaving the mud and the justice and the river behind them. Two broken people who had fixed each other. The jail wagon that carried Caleb Rusk away to the territorial prison in Yuma left deep ruts in the drying mud of the main street. But it did not take the poison of the town with it. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the ferry landing. The sky had cleared to a brilliant, hard azure, the kind of sky that made the red rocks ache with color. But down in the settlement, the mood was gray. Eliza Hart walked into the general store, the bell above the door chiming with a cheerful sound that felt out of place. The conversation inside a buzz of speculation and gossip died instantly. Mrs. Gable, the banker's wife, was inspecting a bolt of calico at the counter. When she saw Eliza, she did not smile. She gathered her skirts close to her body, as if Eliza were carrying a fever, and turned her back. "I need 5 pounds of coffee and a sack of cornmeal, please," Eliza said to the shopkeeper. "Mr. Henderson." Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Henderson would not meet her eyes. He weighed the goods in silence, his movements jerky and nervous. "That'll be $2, he mumbled. "Prices are up. Supply lines are disrupted." It was a lie. Eliza knew the prices. But she also knew that arguing would only give them the show they wanted. She placed the coins on the counter. They were the last of her father's savings, scraped from the bottom of the tin box. As she picked up her sack, a man standing by the pickle barrel spoke. It was one of the miners who had stood in the crowd, watching Rusk threaten to kill her. "Shame about the ferry," the man spat, chewing on a matchstick. "Used to be a respectable crossing. Now it is a hideout for savages and the women who lay with them." Eliza froze. The insult hung in the air, heavy and rancid. She turned slowly. She looked at the miner, then at Mrs. Gable, then at Henderson. "The ferry is open," Eliza said, her voice ringing clear in the dusty room. "And it is the only place in this valley where the truth was told last Tuesday. If that is not respectable enough for you, you can swim." She walked out, the door slamming behind her. Her hands were shaking as she untied Bess from the hitching post. They did not hate her because she was wrong. They hated her because she had forced them to see their own cowardice. Rusk was a monster, but he was their monster. Thomas was a hero, but he was a Dine. And to admit that a savage had more honor than the town's leading citizen was a pill too bitter for them to swallow. The ride back to the river was lonely. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, sounding like hushed accusations. When she arrived at the cabin, the atmosphere changed. The air here smelled of wood smoke and healing, not judgment. Tomas was sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar. His left arm was bound in a sling Eliza had fashioned from a clean sheet. He looked up as she approached, his dark eyes scanning her face with that intensity that always made her catch her breath. He saw the tension in her jaw. He saw the way she gripped the reins. They were unkind, he stated. It was not a question. "They are people," Eliza said, sliding off the horse. "People do not like having their mirrors broken." She carried the supplies into the cabin. Tomas followed her, moving stiffly. The wound in his shoulder was clean. The bullet had passed through, but he had lost blood. And the old injury on his side was still tender. "Let me take that," he said, reaching for the heavy sack of cornmeal with his good arm. "Sit down, Tomas," Eliza ordered, though her tone was gentle. "You are the patient. I am the nurse. Do not confuse the roles." She guided him to the chair by the hearth. She knelt beside him to check his bandages. The smell of the willow bark poultice she had made hung heavy in the room. It was a sharp, earthy scent that reminded her of Senora Elena. She unwrapped the linen. The wound was pink and closing. "No infection. You have the touch," Thomas said softly, watching her hands. "Senora Elena taught you well. I used to think I learned these things to save myself," Eliza murmured, applying fresh salve. "To have a trade if things went wrong. I never thought I would use them to put a warrior back together." "You did not just put me back together. Tomas said. You kept me from falling apart. He reached out and touched a strand of hair that had fallen across her cheek. His fingers were rough, calloused from years of holding reins and rifles, but his touch was light as a moth's wing. I should go, he said suddenly, withdrawing his hand. My horse is rested. I can ride. Eliza looked up, startled. Go, your shoulder is barely knit. If you ride now, you will tear it open. If I stay, Tomas said, looking into the fire, I bring the shadow to your door. You saw them in town today. They look at you with hate because I am here. If I leave, they will forget. You can be Eliza Hart again. Eliza sat back on her heels. Eliza Hart again. The girl who was afraid of her father. The girl who was going to be sold like a broodmare to pay a debt. That girl is gone. Thomas. She drowned in the river the day I pulled you out. I am a hunted man. Eliza, Thomas insisted, his voice rough with an internal struggle. Rusk is gone, but the prejudice remains. The army will not forget I stole their ledger. I will always be looking over my shoulder. I cannot ask you to live half a life in the dark. You are not asking, Eliza said firmly. I am choosing. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the river. The water was calming now, returning to its banks, but it was still powerful. I used to think freedom meant being alone, she said. I thought if I could just get away, go somewhere where no one knew me, I would be free. But I was wrong. Freedom is not running away. Freedom is choosing who you walk with, and knowing you can walk away if you want to. But staying because you want to. She turned back to him. I am not a shield, Tomas, and I am not a charity case. If you leave because you think you are protecting me, then you are no better than Rusk. You are making my choices for me. Tomas went silent. He looked at this woman, this fierce, stubborn, beautiful woman, and he realized he had lost the argument before it had even begun. He was a scout who could track a lizard across solid rock, but he could not navigate the landscape of her heart without getting lost. I will stay, he said finally, until the moon is full. Then we will see. It was a concession. It was enough. Later that afternoon, a buggy rattled down the ferry road. It was not a customer. It was Parson Miller. Eliza watched him from the porch. The old man climbed down slowly, clutching a wooden crate. He looked older than he had a week ago. The shame of his silence during Rusk's reign seemed to have carved new lines into his face. He walked up the steps, removing his hat. He saw Thomas sitting in the chair, and for a moment, the old fear flickered in his eyes. But he swallowed it and nodded. Mr. Bigay, the parson said. Parson, Thomas replied, his face impassive. The parson turned to Eliza. Eliza, child, I did not know if I would be welcome. The ferry is open to everyone. Parson, Eliza said coolly. Even those who lose their voice when it rains. The parson winced. I deserve that. And more. I failed you. Eliza, and I failed your father. A shepherd is supposed to protect the flock from the wolves, not dine with them. He set the crate down on the porch railing. I cannot undo the silence, he said, but I can perhaps help with the noise you want to make. He opened the crate. Inside were books, not Bibles, but primers, McGuffey readers, a battered arithmetic text, a slate board, and a box of chalk. You always wanted to teach, the parson said softly. The town council. Well, they will not give you the schoolhouse. Not now. But the children still need to read. Especially the ones from the shanties along the creek. The ones the town forgets. Eliza reached out and touched the spine of a reader. It was worn, the cover peeling, but to her, it looked like treasure. You are giving these to me? She asked. I am returning them to the service of God, the parson said. And I think God is more likely to be found in a fairy shack teaching a poor child to write his name than in my pews right now. He put his hat back on. I spoke to the sheriff. He says the federal judge is reviewing the ledger. The charges against Mr. Bigay regarding the wagon attack have been dropped. Witness testimony from the blacksmith cleared him. However, he glanced at Tomas. They advise you to stay out of the saloons. I do not drink, Thomas said dryly. Good day. Eliza, the parson said. He turned to leave, then paused. You were brave, child. Braver than any of us. Eliza watched him drive away. She picked up the slate. It was blank. A clean surface. He is trying, Thomas observed. We are all trying, Eliza said. That evening, the challenge shifted to her father. Silas Hart had been drifting around the property like a ghost, fixing fences that weren't broken, coiling ropes that were already coiled. He sat at the dinner table, staring at his stew. The flour is running low, Silas mumbled. And we need tar for the hull. I should go to the bank. Maybe Mr. Gable will extend a small credit. No, Eliza said. She set her spoon down. No more credit. Papa, no more banks. No more notes. Silas looked up, his eyes fearful. But how do we operate? We need supplies. We operate on cash, Eliza said. And we operate on fair trade. We raise the toll for the commercial wagons, the ones hauling ore and timber. They can afford it, and we lower it for the families and the farmers. We charge a fair price for a fair crossing. But Rusk, Silas started, then stopped. The name was a habit he couldn't break. The traders, they expect a discount. They will go elsewhere. Where? Eliza asked. The river is high. The next crossing is 40 miles south. They will pay, Papa, because we are the best ferrymen on the river, not because we are afraid of them. She reached across the table and took her father's hand. It was trembling. You are a good boatman, Papa, she said gently. You know the water better than anyone. Rusk stole your pride, but he did not steal your skill. Take the helm back. I will handle the money. I will handle the books. You just keep the boat afloat. Silas looked at his daughter. He saw the steel in her spine, steel that he had perhaps given her but had lost in himself. You sound like your mother, Silas whispered, tears welling in his eyes. She never took a step backward either. We go forward. Papa, Eliza said. That is the only way the river flows. Late that night, after Silas had gone to bed, Eliza sat by the hearth. The fire was dying down to embers, casting a warm, orange glow over the room. Thomas was sitting on the rug, working with a length of hemp rope. He was splicing it, weaving the strands back into themselves with a dexterity that defied his injury. Eliza watched him. The silence between them was comfortable now. It was not the silence of secrets, but the silence of understanding. What are you making? She asked. A bowline, Thomas said. It is the strongest knot. The harder you pull, the tighter it holds. But he flicked his wrist, and the knot dissolved instantly. It is easy to release if you know how. He finished the splice and handed the rope to her. It was a short length, perhaps 3 feet, with a perfect loop at one end and a smooth, whipped finish at the other. It was not a tool for a boat. It was a symbol. For you, he said. Eliza took it. The hemp was rough and strong. What is this for? The day you pulled me from the river, Thomas said, his voice low and rhythmic. You tied yourself to a tree. You trusted the root to hold you while you jumped into the chaos. He looked at her, the firelight dancing in his obsidian eyes. You are not the girl who needs to be tied to a tree anymore, Eliza, and you are not the girl who gets tied by others, by fathers, or bankers, or traders. He reached out and closed her fingers over the rope. This is your line. You tie your own boat. You decide where it docks, and if the current is wrong, you cut it loose. Eliza looked at the rope, then at him. And if I want to tie it to you? The question hung in the air, bold and terrifying. Thomas went still. He looked at her mouth, then her eyes. Then you must know, he said hoarsely, that I am not a safe harbor. I am a river. I change. I flood. I run dry. I am not afraid of the river, Eliza whispered. I was born on it. She moved from her chair to the rug beside him. The distance closed. She rested her head on his good shoulder. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then relaxed, his arm coming around her to pull her close. There was no desperate kissing this time, no frantic grasping. It was a quiet settling. Eliza listened to the steady thrum of his heart. It was slower than it had been in the canyon. It was the heartbeat of a man who had found rest. "It will be hard," Tomas murmured into her hair. "The town will not accept us. My people will be wary of you." "Let them be," Eliza said. "We have the books, we have the fairy, and we have the truth." She ran her thumb over the rough weave of the rope he had given her. "Tomas." "Yes." "You said destiny is a choice." "I did. Then I choose this," she said. "I choose the hard road, because the easy road leads to a house I do not want to live in." Tomas turned his face, pressing his cheek against the top of her head. He breathed in the scent of her soap and sage and courage. "Then we walk it," he said. "Together." The fire crackled, a log shifting in the grate. Outside, the little Colorado flowed on, endless and indifferent, carving its path through the stone. But inside the cabin, two people had stopped drifting. They had planted their feet. They sat there for a long time, watching the embers fade to ash, holding on to each other in the promise of a morning that would be difficult and dangerous and absolutely, wonderfully their own. The autumn of 1882 brought a gold dust haze to the Arizona Territory. The cottonwood trees along the Little Colorado River turned a brilliant, trembling yellow, dropping their leaves onto the water like coins offered to a silent god. The river itself had settled. It was no longer the raging brown beast that had swallowed men and memories in the spring. It was a ribbon of turquoise and green, flowing deep and steady between the red earth banks. At the Hart Ferry, the rhythm of life had changed. The sound of the cable humming under tension was still there, but it was joined now by a new sound, the chorus of voices reciting the alphabet. Eliza Hart had cleared out the old storage shed, the same one where she had once hidden a bleeding fugitive, and transformed it. She had whitewashed the walls to cover the gloom and installed 2 rows of rough benches. It was not much of a schoolhouse, but to the children who gathered there, it was a palace of mysteries. They came from the isolated homesteads, from the shanties near the mines, and from the tents of the drift workers. There was Toby, the messenger boy, trying to tame his restless energy enough to hold a piece of chalk. There were the miller's 3 daughters, their braids tight and their faces scrubbed pink. And there were others women, mostly who came in the late afternoons when their chores were done, hiding their slate boards under their aprons as if they were contraband. Eliza stood at the front of the room, wiping the slate clean with a damp rag. "Knowledge is not just for Sundays," she told a tired-looking miner's wife who was struggling with the letter S. "When you can read the weighing ticket at the general store, Mr. Henderson cannot charge you for 5 pounds of flour when he only gives you 4. Words are weapons, Mrs. O'Malley, but they are the kind that do not spill blood." The woman looked at the crooked S she had drawn. She looked at Eliza. "I never thought of it like that, Miss Eliza. I just thought books were for fancy folk." "Books are for anyone with eyes," Eliza said firmly. "And you have 2 good ones." Outside, the ferry bell rang. Eliza looked through the open door. Silas Hart was guiding the flatboat into the slip. He moved with a new confidence. The stoop in his shoulders was gone, replaced by the upright posture of a man who owned his own labor. He was shouting instructions to the driver of a wagon loaded with timber. "Easy on the brake. Let her roll gently. We do not want to swim today." Silas was sober. He had not touched the bottle since the day he threw the debt papers into the river. He had replaced the whiskey with work, and though his hands still trembled sometimes in the evenings, he was the captain of his crossing again, and watching him from the high bank, leaning against a fence post with a rifle in the crook of his arm, was Tomas. The town had not embraced Tomas Bigay. When he walked down the main street to buy supplies, mothers still pulled their children close, and men in the saloon still muttered into their beers about savages. But they did not challenge him. The story of the ledger, of the stolen rifles, and of Caleb Rusk's downfall had spread across the territory. Thomas was a curiosity, a danger, and a begrudgingly respected figure. He was the man who had brought down the biggest bully in the county without firing a shot. But Tomas did not care about the town. He cared about the ferry. He cared about the old man who ran it. And mostly, he cared about the woman in the whitewashed shed. That evening, after the last student had walked home and the sun was painting the western horizon in bands of violet and orange, Eliza found Tomas by the river. He was skipping stones, his wrist flicking with a lazy precision. Each stone hopped 5, 6, 7 times before sinking. "You are bored," Eliza said, sitting down on a piece of driftwood beside him. Thomas did not look at her. He watched the ripples spread. "I am not bored. I am waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For the wind to change," he said cryptically. He turned to her. His shoulder was fully healed now, leaving only a silver scar to match the others on his body. He looked healthy, strong, and undeniably wild against the backdrop of the civilized ferry landing. "The snow will come soon to the high country," Tomas said. "My people move the herds to the winter canyons." "It is a time of stories and fire. Grandfather Hustian asks about you. He says the woman with the gray eyes is welcome at his fire." Eliza looked down at her hands. They were stained with chalk dust today, not river mud. "Are you going back?" she asked. The question felt heavy in her throat. "I must go for a time," Tomas said. "To help with the move, to speak to the council about the water rights. Rusk is gone, but the army is still the army. We must be vigilant." He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Come with me, Eliza." The offer hung in the air. It was a beautiful invitation. To ride away from the judgment of the town, from the dust of the ferry, to live in the high silence of the red rocks, to be with him, fully and completely. Eliza looked at the schoolhouse she had just scrubbed. She thought of Mrs. O'Malley learning to write her name. She thought of her father, who was just learning to stand on his own 2 feet again. "I cannot," she said softly. Thomas did not flinch. He did not look angry. He just nodded, as if he had expected this answer. "The school," he said. "The school." She agreed. "And Papa, he is doing well. Thomas, but he is like a sapling that has just been unbent. If the wind hits him too hard right now, he might snap again. I need to stay, for a season, to let the roots take hold." "A season," Thomas repeated. "Winter is long in the high country, and the river is cold here," Eliza said. "But I am not saying goodbye. Thomas, I am saying, not yet." Thomas picked up another stone. He weighed it in his hand, feeling the texture. "You know," he said, "among my people, a man does not own his wife, and a wife does not own her husband. We walk side by side. If one wants to climb the mountain and the other wants to walk the valley, they do not break the bond. They just have different views for a while." Eliza smiled. It was a sad smile, but hopeful. "That sounds like a good law." "It is the only law that works for wild things," Tomas said. "And you, Eliza Hart, are a wild thing, even with that chalk on your dress." He stood up and offered her his hand. "Come, walk with me. There is something I want to show you." They walked upstream, away from the ferry, away from the road, to a quiet bend in the river where the willows grew thick and created a natural cathedral of green and gold. The water here was glassy and still, reflecting the first stars that were beginning to prick the twilight sky. It was the exact spot where Eliza had dragged him ashore months ago. The scars of their struggle, the broken branches, the gouged mud were gone, healed by the summer rains and the regrowth of the grass. Tomas stopped. He turned to face her. The playful demeanor he sometimes wore was gone. He looked solemn, ancient, and incredibly young all at once. "Do you remember this place?" he asked. "I see it every night in my dreams," Eliza admitted. "The cold, the weight of you, the fear." "I remember the light," Tomas said. "I was in the dark, Eliza, drowning, not just in the water, but in the anger, in the betrayal. I thought my life was over. I thought the world was just a mouth waiting to eat me." He took a step closer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in soft deerskin. "The day you dragged me from the water," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "You did not know you were saving a life. You thought you were just pulling a body out of the flood. But you were wrong. He unwrapped the object. It was a bracelet. It was not the delicate, filigreed gold that the ladies in town wore. It was heavy silver, hammered by hand, rough and textured like the bark of a pine tree. And set into the center was a single piece of turquoise, blue as the summer sky, with a spider web of black matrix running through it. You pulled my whole future up onto the bank, Tomas said. Everything I am, everything I will be. It started again the moment you breathed air into my lungs. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the pulse at her wrist. If you will allow it, Eliza, I want to spend that future with you, not as your owner, not as your master, but as your partner. I want to be the one who watches the trail while you teach the world to read. Eliza looked at the bracelet. It was beautiful in its imperfections. It was strong. It was real. You are asking me to marry you, she whispered. I'm asking you to walk with me, Thomas corrected. Marriage in your town means a piece of paper and a promise to obey. I do not want your obedience, Eliza. I want your fire. Eliza looked up at him. Tears stung her eyes, hot and sudden. For so long, men had looked at her and seen a commodity. Rusk had seen a debt payment. Her father had seen a bargaining chip. Even the town saw her as a symbol of scandal. But Tomas saw her. He saw the fire, the grit, the intelligence. He saw the woman who could pull a warrior from a river and stare down a gunman with a book in her hand. I do not want to obey, Eliza said, her voice trembling with emotion. And I do not want to be kept. I want to choose. Every day. I want to wake up and choose you. Then choose, Tomas said. Eliza held out her wrist. Put it on. Thomas slipped the heavy silver cuff over her hand. The metal was cool against her skin. A solid weight that felt like an anchor and a wing all at once. It fits, he said. I go with you because I want to, Eliza said, echoing the realization she had made weeks ago. And I stay here because I must, but my heart walks the high trails with you. Thomas, be gay. He pulled her to him then. It was not the desperate embrace of the escape, nor the tentative comfort of the cabin. It was a claiming. He kissed her, and the world seemed to narrow down to the point where they touched. The smell of sage, the sound of the river, the coolness of the silver, it all fused into a single moment of perfect clarity. They did not need a parson. They did not need a church with stained glass. They had the river, the sky, and the truth. When I return in the spring, Tomas whispered against her lips, I will bring horses, and we will ride to the canyon. You will see the peach trees in bloom. And when you return, Eliza replied, I will have taught Toby to read the treaties, and we will see who tries to cheat him then. Thomas laughed, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated against her chest. We are a dangerous pair. Eliza Hart, we are, she agreed. We are destiny. The winter passed. It was a hard season, with snow drifting deep against the cabin walls and the river freezing along the edges. But it was not a lonely season. The school thrived. The children came, bundled in furs and wool, hungry for the stories Eliza read to them. Even Silas Hart sat in the back sometimes, listening to his daughter explain geography and history, learning about a world bigger than his ferry crossing. Eliza wore the silver bracelet every day. It scratched against the slate board as she wrote. It clinked against the pots as she cooked. It was a constant reminder of the promise that lay out in the snow-covered north. Letters came, carried by dine runners who appeared silently at the ferry landing, handed over a packet, and vanished. They were written on scraps of paper, sometimes on birch bark. Thomas's handwriting was jagged but strong. He wrote of the herd, of the council, of the stars. He did not write, I miss you. He wrote, the wind sounds like your voice. And then, the ice broke. The river swelled, green and lively. The cottonwoods budded. On the first warm day of April, Eliza was standing on the porch of the schoolhouse, ringing the bell to dismiss her students. The children tumbled out, shouting and laughing, running down the path toward their homes. Eliza watched them go, smiling. She wiped her chalky hands on her apron. Then she saw it, a cloud of dust on the northern ridge. She stood very still, her hand going to the silver cuff at her wrist. A rider emerged from the dust. He was riding a paint horse and leading a beautiful, spirited mare with a coat like polished copper. He stopped on the ridge, silhouetted against the vast, blue Arizona sky. He did not wave. He just sat there, watching. Eliza stepped down from the porch. She did not run. She walked. She walked past the toll house where her father was waving his hat. She walked past the ferry boat that tugged at its moorings. She walked out onto the road, her head high, her step sure. Tomas nudged his horse forward. He came down the slope, the loose stones clattering. He stopped 5 paces from her. He looked older, weathered by the winter wind. There were new lines around his eyes, but the smile was the same. "The peach trees are blooming," he said, "and the children can spell freedom," Eliza replied. Thomas leaned down from his saddle, extending his hand. "Are you ready for a ride, partner?" Eliza looked back at the ferry. It was running smooth. Her father was safe. The school was established. Mrs. O'Malley was helping the younger ones now. The foundation was laid. She looked up at Thomas. "I am ready," she said. She took his hand and swung up behind him, settling her arms around his waist, the silver bracelet pressed against his buckskin shirt, right over his heart. They did not ride away forever. The ferry would always be there, a waypoint, a home. But for now, the horizon was wide and open. As they turned toward the canyon, Eliza Hart looked at the river one last time. It flowed on, endless and eternal, washing away the old debts, the old fears, and carrying them toward a future that they would write themselves. 1 page, 1 mile, 1 choice at a time. The sun set over the Arizona territory, not as a dying fire, but as a promise of the dawn to come. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Eliza and Tomas. I hope their journey through the wild, dusty, and beautiful landscape of the Arizona territory touched your heart as much as it did mine. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below and tell me where in the world are you listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of love, courage, and destiny, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Do not forget to hit the like button and smash that hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support means the world to me and keeps the campfire burning for more stories. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your heart open. Safe travels, everyone.